Hello, today we are at the Military Museum in Rowan County, sorry, checking out the wonderful military display they have here. And we're going to get a guided tour, I understand. And over here, this gentleman right here, sir, what is your first name?
My name is Bill. I'm Bill Bolen, president of the Rowan County Veterans Foundation.
Oh, okay. Bill, well, we appreciate it.
The saddles are this is the 1904 enlisted saddle and the 1917 officer saddle, both used by our cavalry. And so you notice there's a hole in the top of this particular saddle, and that's because the Army would buy their saddles from farmers and from sales, this thing nature, just ordinary livestock, so that they were used to being fed on farms. And so what would happen is when they got them out in a battle situation, they weren't able to be fed as well, and they would get a little lean. And so their backbones would become sensitive. And so therefore they developed this particular saddle with a hole in the back to give the animals some relief. Now, here in the officer saddle, from the 1904 to the 1917 officer saddle, the first thing you think is, well, they did away with that concept. But if you look here, one similar to it would have actually been used as late as World War II by the Shore Patrol, which of course was Navy. By that time, the Army cavalry had, for the most part, become mechanized. There was a small contingent in the Army that they still had horses, primarily for parade purposes, but also for a few special operations. But the Shore Patrol was much more particular about the types of animals they wanted. They wanted more like the larger foot horses. And what we would normally consider draft horses or work horses was the kind of horses they wanted, because they're going to be using these horses to go up and down both coasts and along the Gulf Coast as well, looking for enemy activity. And so that was the last time that a saddle of this type was used. And of course, by the time we got our cavalry to World War I, to France in World War I, we found out we really didn't need the cavalry as we thought we might. So because we're basically doing trench warfare, and so the horses that we had, most of them were simply used to pull artillery or pull ammunitions and things of this nature. The POW and MIA table. Now this table here was set up after or at the end of Vietnam, because we still had POWs and MIAs there at that time. And so this table is set up. We set this table up in front of veterans where they eat, and we set this up. And when we do the display, we set the table up from this tablecloth up, and as we put each item on there, we tell what each of the symbolism is of each of those items. People are surprised to know that we are still getting our POWs or the remains in from the missing in action people. We had one just a couple by the VSOs, Veteran Service Organizations, such as American Legion, VFW, DAV. Those types of organizations are normally the ones that will actually conduct the military funerals when the remains are returned. And because of DNA testing and now rapid DNA testing, we're able to identify some of these items that these remains that we were never able to identify previously. Here we have the next thing we have over here is the George Tommy Powers exhibit. And George Tommy Powers was this was his uniform, and this was what he looked like back in those days. And in World War II, he was a guard at the Nuremberg trials, where that they tried the 20 or so Nazi war criminals. And so he was right there with them every day. We've actually got a copy of his courtroom pass, and to show that he was there. And his wall for a photograph of our memorial wall, which is down on the other side of the park here. And this is actually the names on there, except for the specific sections of KIAs. This is simply names of people who are from Rowan County and were honorably discharged from the military. And so the wall was built in 2001, And this particular photograph here was actually taken by accident. But when she saw that the lady that took it saw that she had the reflection of the honor guard from the American Legion there in part of them in reflection, she decided that she would fix this up and give it to us, which we appreciate that. We have a thing here that shows the 100th year anniversary of the American Legion. American Legion was formed in 1919 in Paris, France, and so the post one of American Legion is still in Paris, France. And so Teddy Roosevelt Jr. was one of the founders of the American Legion. And, okay, this is the Blue Jacket Room in the Rowan County Veterans Foundation and Museum here in Morehead, Kentucky. And the Blue Jackets were here from 1942 to 1944, and they were electricians, or training to be electricians, which would work on this relatively new concept called radar. And we've got a radar unit outside here off of a 1942 submarine, as well as the scope here that goes along with that and some other radios. But the story for the Blue Jackets is one of our very treasured stories here in Morehead. So what happened was, on December the 7th of 1941, Morehead University was just a college at that time. And they had about 450 students at the time. And so what happened was, come January the 15th, when they started to redo the next semester after Pearl Harbor, they found out instead of 450 students, they only had 13 students registered, and only 8 of them showed up for the first day of class. And so they decided they had to do something. So Dean Lappin, who our building catty corner from us here is named after, and President Vaughn decided that they would go to Washington, D.C. to see if they could get in the military effort. Because what had happened was everyone in Morehead that was able had either been enlisted, drafted, or had gone north to work in the war factories. And so there were a lot of people that were missing from the Morehead area. So Dean Lappin and President Vaughn decided they were going to Washington, D.C. So they couldn't go to Washington, D.C., though, because they didn't have enough gasoline ration cards. So they got the mayor and another citizen to go with them. And as they went to Washington, D.C., they first talked to the Army, and the Army said, guys, we got 2 posts in Kentucky. We really don't need any help. And so they decided they would go to the Marines, and the Marines said, well, we only train on 2 coasts. Why don't you go see the Navy? And Dean Lappin laughed, and he said, the Navy? We don't have any water in Morehead, Kentucky. All we've got is a Licking River. And so because this was 20 years before our lake was made. And so they said, well, you're up here, aren't you? He said, okay. So they went to see the Navy and had a little bit of hope in their heart. And they went to see the Navy, and come to find out it was going to take them 9 months to get in to see Admiral King. So, I mean, Admiral King is very, very busy, build for and get navies prepared for 2 different wars, which is what World War II was. And so finally they said, well, wait a minute. We know Fred. Now, Fred was Fred Vinson, and he was from Louisa, Kentucky, which is just south of Ashland a little ways. And Fred had been our U.S. congressman, and at this point he is a federal appellate judge. So they called Fred, and Fred says, hey guys, I'd be glad to help you if I can. He said, I'm personal friends with Harry Truman, the vice president, and I'm personal friends with Ernest King, the admiral of the Navy. However, this is Washington, D.C., and that doesn't necessarily mean a lot. He said, let me make some calls, and I'll call you back. Now, these guys, this is the middle of the winter, like 20th of January. They're standing out, and one of them is standing outside his phone booth in an area they don't know in Washington, D.C., and the other 3 are trying to stay warm in a car best they can, but they don't want to use the fuel too much because they've only got so much gasoline. So as it goes, they're taking turns standing outside, freezing as they're waiting for the phone to ring. So the phone in the phone booth finally rang, and it was Fred Vinson calling them back. And so Fred said, go see the Navy, go see Admiral King, he'll see you. So they got their hopes really up, and they go see Admiral King, and Admiral King says, guys, I'm going to tell you right now, I've got about 5 minutes for you. I'm very busy, and the only reason I'm going to meet with you is because my friend Fred Vinson asked me to meet with you. He says, it took me 3 maps to even find your city on where your city is located in Kentucky, and I just don't see what we could possibly do for you. And so Dean Lappin said, sir, are you telling me that in the world's most powerful Navy that there's nothing that doesn't have to do with water? And the admiral said, well, I kind of like you boys. I like your attitude. And so he said, let me see. And he started looking through the book and he said, would you like to train some electrical engineers? Well, we didn't realize at the time, at least Dean Vaughn or President Vaughn and Dean Lappin didn't recognize it at the time, but they were getting into what they call the V1 program. Now, the V1 program is only going to be 20 colleges and universities across the entire United States. So we're dealing with big universities, East Coast, Yale, Dartmouth, all the big East Coast universities, the Gulf universities, the universities in California and Washington, those areas on the coast, and of course, Michigan, Illinois, and Wisconsin, all those universities that are right around the lakes where the Navy trains. But yet we don't have a spot of water except for the little old Licking River that comes through here. And so we have just fallen into, and we have got one of these 20 slots right here in Morehead. So in a couple of weeks, we got our first 50 recruits in, and the records show that there was 49 plus one. And the one was a guy that had been just west of here, and he was going to Norfolk, Virginia to catch his ship. He missed his ship, didn't know what to do. So he decided he was going to thumb back and hitchhike back home to where he would live. And he was going to talk to his recruiter and find out, what he should do now. And so he was stopped coming through Morehead, and the police wanted to know what he was doing, what his situation was. And he told him, he said, well, we better contact the Navy. So they contacted the Navy, and the Navy said, boy, you are a long ways from anywhere. He said, they said, hang on a minute, let me go talk to somebody. So they held the phone for a few minutes to go to college. And so he did. Well, he wasn't a dummy. He graduated valedictorian of his class out of 300 students. So he wasn't a dummy. He just missed his ship and didn't know what to do. And didn't have any money. Didn't even have money. We ended up out of 4,171 students that were originally assigned. We graduated 3,600. Now, about out of that extra 600 or so that was assigned and never graduated, most of those actually never got here because they would, as you know, in the military, sometimes you'll have orders, but those orders will be changed before you actually get somewhere. And that was the case, especially in World War II. So the Button Hall, where the building that still exists here, where the ROTC building is currently, they use that building, and around the university. And up in the corner over here, to your right, is the in the far corner in the upper other cabinet over here. That's where a picture of them marching right down beside our building here, our museum building here, and that used to be called University Boulevard. And so that is our Blue Jacket story, and a kind of a hidden story. A lot of people don't know about. One entire family, the Jackson family, that ended up going to the Navy. Ed Jackson, who was one of the older guys of that family, he said every one of these Navy guys had at least $2 in his pocket, and he said he'd never seen $2. He was a farm boy, and he says, I'm going to join the Navy. I'm going to get me some of that money too. And so he did, and not only that, all of his cousins and his brothers and everybody else. You don't find a Jackson guy in this part of the country that isn't a Navy guy. They're all Navy guys. Okay. This is our World War I trench, and we have wood in here just simply for your convenience. But this would be a trench that would be similar to the trenches of World War I in France. And by the time we got to France in World War I, the French had already built all of the trenches, so we didn't build a lot of them. But when the whistle was blown, we would be required to go over the top. And in the battles of the Argonne Forest, many of the battles, we might have a 50% chance of survival for the guys who went above. It's a very bloody war. The floors in the trenches were simply dirt, and they would have, when it rained, they were, of course, keep their feet wet, and of course, then they would get trench foot. And as you know, of course, after World War I, because it was so bloody, it became against the illegal for America to ever get into another war outside of the continental United States. And so now, the one thing that a lot of people are not familiar with is that World War II was not actually one war. It was actually two separate wars. So we had the European War, and then, of course, we had the Asian War. Now, this all began for Europe. It began in 1939 when Hitler invaded Poland. And so, as I told you previously, it was illegal for us to get into a war, and it was illegal for us to give or to sell Great Britain. We came up with this idea. President Roosevelt came up with this idea of the Lend and Lease Act, and so that we could lend them things and we could lease them things, but we just weren't going to give them to them, and we weren't going to sell them to them. So we got around that. Well, in Japan, the Japanese were gobbling up all of these islands in the Pacific, and had they not attacked Pearl Harbor, we may or may not have gone to war with them. But when they decided they wanted Pearl Harbor and attacked us on December the 7th of 41, we immediately, on December the 8th, declared war against Japan. Well, that way we've got just one war going on at that time, just one part of World War II. And so then on December the 11th, which many historians consider Hitler's most curious move, is Hitler declares war against the United States. And so, of course, on December 11th, we declared war as well. On the Japanese side, we have our artifacts here. We have the kamikaze headband, or it's actually a replica, because those were actually made as just before they went into battle. And because of the nature of their business, there were no originals known to survive. There's a Japanese sword, some of our army, our military armaments. Here is a Japanese flag that a soldier would carry in his left front pocket. And these would, the large words on the right-hand side indicates the name of the person who owns it. And all the words that are written out from the sun are simply, they are like we would sign a yearbook, okay? And so they would keep that with them, and they didn't have photographs. So if they had an opportunity and they wanted to reminisce about home, they could take this flag out and look at it. But the Japanese never planned to go home once they went into war. So much different than the Europeans, including the Germans and the Italians. They all expected to go home. The Japanese never planned to go home when they went to war. The Japanese rifle, with the bayonet affixed, is about 2 foot taller than the average Japanese. This is a German uniform, a German MG-34, a machine gun, a German stick grenade. We have a German, on this side, we have a gyroscopic compass from a German fighter, and a bayonet from the German side, and of course the Nazi flag. We built our design here to replicate the villages of Austria and Germany prior to the war. If you notice, they always use a curved shingle in that part of the country, whereas in the U.S. we've always used a straight shingle. These are our, down below here is our American artifacts. Here we have a canteen from one of our guys in the next county over in Olive Hill, and he actually engraved in his aluminum canteen everywhere that he went during World War II. We have barbed wire from the D-Day invasion from Omaha Beach. In fact, General Teddy Roosevelt Jr. was the only general that was on any of the battlefields on D-Day, and despite the presidents and other higher officers' disagreement, he chose to be on that battlefield, and his men indicated that gave them such a morale boost to know that their general was right with him. Now, he would die in the war when he was 56 years old, but not from a battle injury. He simply had a heart attack, which was not all that unusual in that day and time. The ruptured duck indicates that if you have one of these on you, that on your uniform, that you are legally discharged from the military, because when the guys came back from Europe, they didn't have paperwork most times. And so if they didn't have this, they would be subject to being arrested either by the military police or by civilian police, because rationing was ongoing, and they could not buy civilian clothing. And so, because everything was rationed during World War II. And so they would have to go home in their uniforms. And so if they got caught without this on there, they may be detained. And if so, they didn't have cell phones back in those days, or quick communication. So they might be tied up for 6 months while letters went back and forth so they could get things cleared up. So that was very important. Now, obviously, if a person was a deserter, they might figure out a way to get this or get some civilian clothes. But people who want to do criminal acts are always can find a way to do so. Over here in the Asian side, we have this little display here is about Pearl Harbor, and of course about the USS Arizona monument. It's a screen that will scroll. And a lot of people don't realize that Elvis Presley was the one of the first contributors to the project, and he did a concert and gave $50,000 um, for that project. And that was a lot of money back in those days. The underwater demolition team and the SEALs. The SEALs actually still wear those shorts today. We have the Pearl Harbor duty officer handwritten log from December 7th, 1941. It is the original and is the only one that is in existence, and we have it right here in our little museum. Now that would the words from that would be typewritten, and the typewritten copies would be then sent on to Washington as the report. But we've got the actual handwritten notes and the report. This is a picture of Pappy Boynton over here in his Baa Black Sheep. Pappy Boynton was once interviewed about the television show Baa Black Sheep, and he was yes, and he's a guy with a mustache there, and he was reportedly said that the military actions of the airplanes were and the men were pretty well correct, as much as you could do for a Hollywood show. He said, but the nurses, he said, heck, there were no nurses. That's all. Z at the 38th parallel, which also runs just in the southern part of our county here. There are three rooms up there, three buildings, and one of them is there's the blue room. And if you go through this door, there's normally a North Korean guard here, and you go through there, you're in North Korea. You can go in, but you can't come back out unless you're Dennis Rodman, of course. There is actually a yellow line in the room and outside the blue room, and there's a conference room or conference table that sits halfway on the one side of the yellow line and one of the other. A lot of people are surprised to know that it was not the Korea was not a U.S. war or U.S. action. It was actually a United Nations action. Now, the Corsair airplane here was the only fighter contract that was not canceled at the end of World War II. Very formidable plane. It has two 9-cylinder rotary engines. So the cylinders are all go out from a circle, and they're back to back. It has a whopping 2,500 horsepower, and it's only about 33 feet long. And it was first of all called the Whistling Death by the Japanese in World War II, but it can fly 550 miles an hour in a dive. It can travel on the straight about 451 miles per hour, and but it normally cruises at about 250 or so miles an hour. But there is one example of Vought that actually shot down a MiG-15 jet, and that's the only proven example that we have of that. So the jets were coming on early on here, and two of our earliest jet pilots, by the way, the jets were not used as fighter aircraft, but as more as light bombing in front of our infantry. And two of those pilots were I guess people might recognize some of their names. Neil Armstrong, who flew for the Navy, and Buzz Aldrin, who flew for the Army, the Air Force, that is. And so, which had previously been the Army Air Corps. The Air Force is only 4 years old when the Korea starts. But those guys, there's no record that they ever met each other and onto the moon together. This is a picture. So I was telling you about the Corsair airplane. The Corsair airplane was the savior of our actions in not only in the Pacific, but in World War II, but also in Korea. Here we have an Air Force, Navy flight jacket. And one of the jokes we like to play here, we're always playing jokes on the other forces, all right? So this is one of our little jokes. We put that on an Air Force uniform because no Air Force guy wants to know that the Navy has more planes than the Air Force does. So this is the And we're always kidding each other. In fact, I've got a son of mine. We were all Army in our family except for one son, and so I send him a box of crayons every Christmas, and he retaliates. I probably should. This is the North Korean flag and the South Korean flag. Um, the photography was something that was coming along to the public during the Korean years. It actually started in World War II, slightly before. And if you've ever noticed, words portrait and landscape were something that we use in our common everyday language. The Brownie camera had the ability to do that. You could take pictures portrait style or landscape style. And most of those pictures, if you've got those in your family heirlooms, and most people do, you'll find those pictures are just about that size because that's the way that they were developed. Simply that they would just do a contact print when they developed them. So all the pictures were just about that size. And it was a very rudimentary camera, but it helped bring regular photography to just ordinary people. Here we've got an MP Brizard, the shoulder sleeve that goes from the DMZ, as well as our other artifacts. We've got back under here, we've got the M1 Garand, kind of hidden back under there a little bit. We've got our other general artifacts. Behind you on the floor, we have in the wintertime would be using in Korea, and they're rather rare. We're happy to have those. And all these guys here are local guys here. This is Mr. Hyatt and Mr. Gilly, and I have lunch with those guys or breakfast with those guys most every week. We've got our local barber here who's passed away. We've got Chess Kelly here who was a test pilot for the Corsair airplanes, among others. Had 10 metal roofs. There were 80-pound sandbags on each side of the roof to help hold the tin down the monsoon season. We had the buildings were built by the Navy Seabees, and we had they were on 4-foot centers. They were basically plywood and otherwise wood. We had 2 foot of wood at the bottom, plywood, and then 4 foot of screen. And in the monsoon season, we would put this milky colored plastic over the screens to try to keep dry. And people ask us, well, why didn't you put clear plastic on them? Was it you wanted to be camouflaged or privacy? And I said, no, because the truth about it is we didn't have the ability to make clear plastics yet. And here we have the types of uniforms that we would wear. The guys wearing the old style. When I was there in 1969, we had the same style, but it was made out of a lighter material called ripstock. And there's the M16 rifle. It has a 20-round magazine, but we only packed 19 because of there was a spring in the bottom. There's a care package. We asked anybody that's involved in a care package program to please get involved with them if you can. It's a great thing and this are the mosquito netting that we would put around our bunks. Malaria was a real problem, so we tried to make sure we didn't get bit from mosquitoes any more than we had to. We would have transistor radios to listen to the Armed Forces radio network while we were in base camp only. And if you didn't like rock music of the 60s and you like country music or something else, we would use the reel-to-reel recorders and those reel-to-reel. And our foot lockers are pretty well the same as they've been ever since World War II and through Korea and into Vietnam. It did have an orange stripe around it. That's why it was called Agent Orange. And one of our artisans did a spill here to remind us of the dangers of Agent Orange that we would later find out. And many of us who were Vietnam veterans suffered from medical problems as a result of the Monte Guard were the mountain people of South Vietnam, extremely good fighters, and they would be with you at any given time. If they were with you at the start of the battle, they would be there at the end. They would build their houses on stilts, such as this, and they would live on the platform, and then they'd have a grass roof, as opposed to the bamboo roofs that you would see in the lower parts of the country. This is the M60 machine gun. You notice it has a bipod on it, and there's only 2 people have ever been known for sure to fire this weapon from the hip, and that's Arnold Schwarzenegger and Sylvester Stallone. Problems with the wood swelling up early on, and so Marines, that's a sniper rifle. Here we have rice, which was a staple in of the locals in Vietnam, with a basket and the type of hats that they would wear. Here is one of the first examples I ever had of recycling. The South Vietnamese civilians would take our used tires and they would cut them up and make and use the inner tubes for straps and make sandals, and then they would sell them back to us. And so these are the types of packs that the guys that were out in the field every day would wear. A much larger pack than the day pack. Pocket of a pilot, and then of course they would could turn that on if they were to bail out. This is a predecessor to the bulletproof jacket. It's not bulletproof at all. It is a flak jacket. It's got about 1 inch of rubber in it, which would give us some protection from the grenades or something of this nature. But it's certainly not a bulletproof. Oh, that's my picture there. The true survivors of Vietnam was the igloo cooler. They made a lot of money in Vietnam, and now you can't pass any kind of construction unit, whether it's government or private or whatever. Everybody's got an igloo cooler. They're all plastic now, but they're yellow and they say igloo on them. So that's how they got their good start. Okay, this is rats, and it is the Viet Cong would use these tunnels to come out of them in the jungle, and they would shoot a few people, and then they would pack hiding in the tunnels. And these their tunnel rats would wearing nothing but pants and taking a 45 and a flashlight and go in after them.
Well, I would recommend anybody that would be in the Morehead, Kentucky area to check out the Rowan County Veterans Museum. Pretty interesting, actually. Being a veteran, it meant a lot to me. So, anyway, if you're in the area, check it out. Morehead, Kentucky. This is Bob. See you the next time.